Start webinar.
Okay.
Thanks. Okay, Jay, you're live now.
Hello, a warm welcome back to another JIB webinar. I'm Jay Palmer, JIB's Chief Exec, and it seems that the summer has been a long distant memory since the last webinar we had back in June. Delighted to see that the webinar has been attracting over 1,000 delegates, and that hopefully shows the importance of the subject matter. We hope that these webinars have been providing you all with useful insights, analysis, and importantly, be able to cut through the sea of government information and guidance that we've all had to be aware of. And again, as I say, since our last webinar in June, we're all being left wondering how effective the flexible furlough scheme was going to operate, and importantly, how the lockdown, the easing of the lockdown, was going to help support the economic recovery. And here we are 4 months on. We've got the resurgence of the virus and just a quarter of the country now in lockdown. It was quite timely there to see the Chancellor come with his winter plan, which some of you have already picked up, published back in September, which I think included some big measures. And I think it goes to show those big measures are needed in response to a rapidly evolving environment, which we'll be coming on to in a little bit more detail. While nobody could have predicted the continued disruption that's been caused by the pandemic, but I've continued to witness some tremendous work being done, both by the sector, the supply chain, and importantly, our workforce, who are all been working under some unpredictable, but quite often challenging circumstances. I mean, this does highlight to me what we do get right. Like everything else, it also exposes what we could manage better and do differently. As we all start to think about reshaping and rethinking the way we operate, I know there's a real determination for us to build back a better, stronger sector with a great deal of optimism. I say this in the context of the construction industry being the largest industry in the world, and for us to ensure that we turn this crisis into an opportunity to help support the electrification of transport, electrification of heating, smarter cities, and as the Prime Minister said this week, at gale force speed. And I'm confident that the sector will remain resilient, responsive, and innovative as we step up to seize on some of these key opportunities. I'm pleased to say the JIB continues to respond to this fast pace environment, and we've tried to do what we can by tailoring the advice, giving you the relevant information that you can actually digest and incorporate into your business. But more importantly, just to know that we're here to help and support you. So if there's anything missing, do give us a shout. We do like to hear back on any areas we can further support you. And from my point of view, the JIB is going to continue to do the good work on your behalf by shining a light on the high skills, the competence, the standards being delivered by JIB members to the outside world. And I think for me, to promote the outstanding work that's been delivered by over 650 JIB member companies. So as you see in front of you today's agenda, I'm delighted to welcome Fergus from BEIS, who has an impressive background, both working with Treasury, but also leading on some key influential roles at BEIS. You'll hear a little bit more about what the work of Fergus, but really excited because Fergus leads on the construction sector on behalf of us in the Department for Business. And I'm really looking forward to hearing his assessment on the current situation and gaining his latest insights into the Construction Leadership Council's recovery plan, and particularly for us all, plan support directed to our sector. And then we'll turn on to Andy. Andy, our resident expert, some of you are familiar with. He'll be bringing us up to speed on some of the details that emerge from the Chancellor's winter plan, but also specific reference. I know some of you are interested to understand how the job support scheme will work. And also, I'm sure Andy's going to sort of share his invaluable analysis around that. And again, just to remind delegates, we have a dedicated Q&A. To make these webinars interactive, your participation is absolutely vital. We've changed our platform, so we moved to Zoom. Hopefully some of you are now familiar with Zoom. There is a Q&A box where you can post your questions to our presenters and myself. And again, use that Q&A to share any observations, any comments or what's really on your mind, what's your forefront of mind that we can perhaps debate and discuss as well. So without further ado, if I could hand over to you, Fergus.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Fergus Harradence. I am the Deputy Director for Construction in the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. To explain a little bit about my role, I guess if you wanted the one word summary of what I do in normal non-coronavirus times, that word would be productivity. Really, the central element of my job is about improving the efficiency, performance, productivity and profitability of the construction sector in the UK. How we do that is a combination of things that we manage directly, both policy areas, for example, in relation to things like construction payments, construction company law, and programs that we run. For example, the Transforming Construction Challenge through UK Research and Innovation, where we're supporting various R&D demonstration projects within the sector and investing to build its innovative capability. And then another very important part of my job is coordinating work across government and working with other organisations within it on a whole range of issues relevant to the sector, whether it's government's capital spending programmes of the sort that are overseen by the Department of Transport, or whether it's with DfE on skills, or the Ministry of Homes, Communities and Local Government on issues like land use planning and housing. My job is really to coordinate that activity and make sure that we are working in a consistent way across government to ensure that we're encouraging the right behaviours within the industry and creating the right incentives to make the industry a better performing, more sustainable and more profitable one. Coming on to the topic of today's presentation, I'm just going to give you a quick run through of the impact of coronavirus on the construction sector in the UK, and then what the government and the Construction Leadership Council's response to that has been, and just highlight some of the important developments. By way of background, and I won't detain you very long with this, if someone asks me what the answer is to almost any construction question, I usually say it's 9%, because construction accounts for about 9% of all economic activity and about 9% of all employment within the UK. It's a very significant sector in terms of offering employment opportunities and driving economic activity across the whole of the country. It's a great customer of some manufacturing businesses within the UK. About 80% of the construction products used in the UK are manufactured here. So it is a really important customer for manufacturing sectors. And actually, the services industry linked to the built environment is not only very important domestically, so we benefit from having our architects, consultant engineers, designers, etc. It's also one of the great hidden export success stories of the UK, because we export these services extremely successfully all over the world. May as well go on to the next slide. So what's actually happened as a result of the coronavirus pandemic? Well, for the last few years, the construction industry has been recording record levels of output. That's really run from 2016 through to the end of 2019. What happened at the start of 2020 was that things seemed to be on track for probably not quite as good a year, because a lot of people had priced in a certain amount of disruption due to us leaving the EU into their investment plans. So we were expecting a bit of a tailing off in investment. But obviously, we hadn't forecast the impact of COVID-19. And this really did hit construction hard in the way that it hit other sectors of the economy hard. We estimate that overall output within the industry will be somewhere between 20 and 25% lower than it would otherwise have been absent coronavirus. The sectors that have been worst hit have been private house building, although that has subsequently recovered and is now performing quite strongly. But there were 3 or 4 months, there was a real hiatus in one of the subsectors in the industry that's driven activity over the last few years. The commercial construction market, obviously the bottom has fallen out of that. whether it's to do with leisure and hospitality related refurbishment work, or whether it's to do with your larger scale construction jobs. That's one of the areas that's been hit really quite hard. And then also the investment by particular firms in the private sector in repair, maintenance and improvement. A lot of organisations have put their investment plans on hold until they have a clearer picture of what's likely to happen, what the extent of the disruption, the financial impact on them is going to be. So as a result, the forecast scenario for 2020 is a pretty grim one. We're seeing a significant dip, but then at this point in time, we are actually predicting, and this is really from now on, a sustained recovery throughout 2021. And this graph really illustrates the point of how big and steep the dip was that we've fallen into, but also the fact that what we've seen since then is a gradual and sustained economic recovery. Now, quite what pattern this is going to have, it's going to be really difficult to see. We would all like it to be a fairly rapid V-shaped recovery, but most of the people that I talk to in the industry are predicting something like a more like a tick sign, or the Nike swoosh, as a couple of people like to describe it, where we see a sustained recovery, maybe with a few blips, but because we've fallen from such a high level, and next year we face the potential impact of additional waves of coronavirus, unless a vaccine or other treatment is developed very quickly, plus the impact of us finally leaving the EU, i.e. the single market and the customs union, which will have an impact on costs and the economy within the UK. It's likely to take until probably about 2022, maybe 2023, that we're actually seeing a similar level of activity overall in the construction market. But what that might disguise is a significant shift in activity within the construction industry, because most people are predicting that investment in private house building, infrastructure and things like domestic repair, maintenance and improvement, as people spend some of the money that they've been saving over the last few months on home improvements, will drive a recovery in these subsectors, could well grow. But what we're going to see is a continued period where commercial investment in construction really does remain in the doldrums outside, say, the utilities sectors, where you have regulatory requirements relating to capital investment programs. Next slide, please. So when the coronavirus pandemic struck, the Construction Leadership Council, which is the body that aims to facilitate dialogue between government and the industry about the construction sector, and it was the forum which we worked with when we were developing the construction sector deal, and we've worked with on various other initiatives. When it became apparent what the extent of the impact was going to be, the Construction Leadership Council decided that we needed to do two things. We needed to set up a task force that brought the whole industry together in a way that it's never been brought together before. And we also needed a plan as to how the industry was going to recover. So to start with the task force, the aim of the CLC was to say, in the past, this has been a very fragmented industry. A lot of people who work within the same industry have not felt much of a sense of common purpose or approach. They would say, well, they work in infrastructure, I work in the domestic sector. There's a gulf between us in terms of what we do, who we work for, how we go about doing our work. That we decided had to change. And so we built a task force that was comprised of not only firms that represent everything on the commercial contracting sector, from your largest infrastructure contractors through to your subcontractors, those right the way down to your small 1- and 2-man businesses that work on domestic RMI. We brought all of their representatives together, and then we added in the representatives of other important elements of the supply chain, so the professions, the consultants, but also the product manufacturers and the merchants and suppliers, so that we could say, yes, we actually got the ability to gather information from all parts of the industry, but also to get the whole industry galvanized to work together to solve the common problems that are posed by coronavirus. And for the first couple of months or so, the priority really was about managing the crisis. It was providing information to firms about how to operate safely on sites and making sure that they understood the operation of things like the job retention scheme, self-employment income support scheme, and other forms of government support. It was working with government around some of the measures that we've put in place around prompt payment and things like that to help the industry. And it was also about reporting back on specific intelligence about particular problems and working with the industry to resolve those, which did sort of involve difficulties in sourcing supplies of products or materials of various kinds. After about 2 months in full crisis response mode, we decided that we needed to pivot and we needed to start thinking about the future in the sense of the short to medium term and what was actually going to enable the industry to start taking the first steps along the pathway to recovery, and what was the vision for that recovery. So we worked with all the partners on the task force, and also with a wider number of businesses and other organisations in the construction sector to come up with Roadmap to Recovery, which is the industry recovery plan for construction, which is based around 3 phases. So the first phase, which we just concluded, was the restart phase, which we estimated would last about 3 months. And this was really about embedding some of the reforms and changes that had been introduced in response to coronavirus. So trying to restart work and get sites operating to the highest level of output possible as quickly as possible, taking account of the new requirements around safety and coronavirus prevention guidelines that needed to be implemented on sites, in builders, merchants, product manufacturers, operations, etc. But to really try and restart the supply chain and get it capable of supporting an industry working at scale. We also want to make sure we're maximising employment of all those working in the construction industry. Now, one of the big impacts of previous recessions has been the number of people who fall out of the construction industry and don't return. And this is a particular concern as the demographic of the industry changes and the workforce ages. Because again, we know from experience that the people most likely to leave the industry are in 2 categories. The older, i.e. over 50s, who think I've had enough after 30 years, I'll go and do a different type of job. Or young people at the start of their careers who think I'm not really getting on in construction, which is what I wanted to do. Is there somewhere else where the grass is greener, which has a job for me? I'm still young enough to make the switch and start all over again. I'll do it now. And these also tend to be the people who are at most risk of being made redundant by their employers as well, which rather exacerbates the problem. So we've been looking at ways in which we can support the industry through the job retention scheme, through a talent retention scheme, which we funded to help broker moves of people between organisations, and making sure that businesses are aware of various initiatives that the Treasury has funded around employment support to ensure that we retain as many people and their knowledge and skills within the industry as possible. And then finally, and this is something on which we've issued quite a lot of guidance and we've worked with the industry to try and resolve, it's preventing the industry lapsing into civil war and having too many people spending too much time, effort and money trying to slit each other's throats in commercial disputes, rather than getting to grips with the real problems, which are how we respond to COVID-19 and how we build a better, stronger industry as we emerge from the pandemic. So the second phase of the plan that we're moving into now is really about what it is that we can do to drive the industry forwards. And this is really about how we create demand and a sustainable pipeline of demand for the entire industry, what measures we can introduce that will have a quick impact in terms of supporting productivity and maintaining levels of output to compensate for the impact of social distancing, and what is it that we can do to improve the professionalism and capability of the industry and make sure that it does continue to invest in training and professional development at this time, and that doesn't just become a casualty of coronavirus. And then finally, the reinvent phase that we hope to move into at some point in 2021. What is it that we can do then to drive forward the transformation of the industry, make it less reliant on labour, make it more innovative, more financially robust and sustainable, and capable of delivering some of the strategic policy objectives that government has got in relation to net zero carbon, environmental benefits, and better and safer, more reliable buildings and other built assets. So we're delivering value for clients, public and the private sector. And then finally, as well, what it is that we can do to encourage a much stronger partnership. So in the future, moving away from the very adversarial relationships that sometimes characterize the construction sector supply chain, and looking to make stronger, more collaborative, more long-term relationships between firms and the industry. So next slide, please. So in terms of some of the things that have been completed to date, and I just wanted to quickly highlight as examples of things that we've done to implement the actions in the plan. In relation to restarting and increasing work, well, the CLC worked with the government to bring forward an accelerated pipeline of projects from the National Infrastructure and Construction Pipeline. Essentially, any project that we could accelerate the delivery of, we've tried to do that. And we've identified a pipeline of 340 projects worth up to £37 billion. These are projects the length and breadth of Britain. They cover transport, schools, regeneration projects, housing. Almost every subsector of the industry would find a project that was relevant to them on the list. We've published and we continue to update the site operating procedures, which explains how to apply government guidance on coronavirus prevention on construction sites. This has spawned a whole raft of other guidance that covers merchant branches, the operations of mineral and construction product producers, and also for SMEs working in people's homes and what they can do. We've also worked with the Construction Industry Training Board to produce a number of safety checklist forms and other resources, including training toolkits that firms can use to educate their workforce. And we've also developed a number of training videos or case studies of good practice to give people an idea of what a COVID secure site actually looks like. And all these resources can be accessed from the CLC website. We've also taken steps to try and support key markets such as house building via an extension of the physical date for purchases under the Help to Buy scheme, additional support in relation to VAT cuts. Again, it's just trying to incentivise people to keep purchasing new homes and a certain level of activity in the market to stimulate demand for construction, and also working with MHCLG on flexibilities around the planning rules. So, for example, allowing extended working hours on sites to enable firms to compensate for the impact of not being able to have as many people working on sites simultaneously due to social distancing. We're also making sure that people who've got planning permissions don't lose that as a result of the fact they haven't been able to take forward work due to COVID-19 disruption. And we've also worked with government to make sure that the building safety programme to remediate unsafe high-rise residential buildings after the Grenfell Tower fire is also proceeding. Next slide, please. Some of the other things that we've done in order to support employment, the Construction Leadership Council's talent retention scheme, available UK-wide for all firms. It provides a portal for both firms and individuals to advertise vacancies or register that they're looking to work on. And the aim is to support the industry to recruit and retain staff. It's entirely not for profit. It's funded by us, the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. And it is also supported by a wide range of professional institutions, firms, and the trade unions. And we are going to sustain this for another 6 months until April next year to help us help the construction industry move people around from where there's maybe less work to where there is actually work. The CITB has announced cuts in the construction industry levy. And it's also looking at what it can do to provide more support to workers and the training of apprentices as the job retention scheme ends. They have also, in the process of developing, they've published the industry stabilisation plan, and they're planning to accelerate the reward of grant funding. And I mentioned the online learning tools earlier. So next slide, please. And then in relation to minimising disruption, there have been two public procurement notices issued by government governing the behaviour of public sector construction clients. And we're also encouraging private sector clients to pay invoices promptly and not to initiate disputes. So far, that seems to have progressed relatively well. There is as yet no evidence that payment deadlines or payment periods are lengthening. That may still happen in the future, but certainly the last 6 months worth of data we have been quite encouraging on that score, and hopefully it will continue. And there is also some evidence that firms within the industry are working together to resolve some of the issues that have arisen as a result of COVID-19, for example, delays in the completion of construction work and the potential liability that firms might have, the penalties linked to that. Next slide, please. And then we are currently also in the process of taking forward various other commitments to support the industry over the longer term. So we're working with the industry, and this is really a cross-government effort to develop a construction playbook, which is going to set out a much more consistent approach to the procurement and management of government construction projects, and hopefully much longer term, more collaborative, better relationships for both sides between government and public sector bodies and firms within the construction industry. I mean, it really is intended to be a revolution in terms of how the government engages with the industry. And we want that to prompt a similar revolution within the way in which the industry works with government, and to be much more transparent, open, engaged, honest and realistic about its ability to deliver construction projects to time and what they will actually cost. So to pull us out of the negative cycle of underbidding, overambitious, or optimistic schedules for completing construction projects, and people then hoping to make money by changes to schedules or various other expedients, or sweating the supply chain, and actually saying, no, at the outset, let's be much more open, let's be much more transparent, let's set a sensible plan for the implementation of this, and let's pay you a fair price for the work that you do, which guarantees you a reasonable margin, but on the basis that you behave decently towards your supply chain, and the benefits are not just captured by a small number of contractors, they do flow down through the industry. We've also introduced the Green Homes Grant, investing £2 billion in upgrading homes, public and private sector, to improve energy efficiency, and a further £1 billion invested in improving the energy efficiency of public buildings. The CITB is going to be publishing its skills plan for the industry in the next month, which will set out the vision for the future and how it will support the industry to recover from the pandemic. And we are looking at what we can do to embed better, fairer contract terms within contracts within the industry, and to make sure that people are actually just thinking ahead. They're anticipating that there might be disruption to the delivery of contracts caused by coronavirus, caused by Brexit, caused by the weather, but actually making sure that they embed into their contracts a clear approach that everyone can understand about how these issues will be identified and then resolved, so everybody understands what the process is going to be. Next slide. And then just finally, all of this activity is geared towards getting us back on track to where we were late last year at the beginning of this year, which is working to deliver the overall strategic objectives set in Construction 2025 in 2013, and then the construction sector deal around reducing the whole life cost of built assets by a third, improving the speed of delivery and the reliability of delivery by 50%, lower emissions in terms of the minimising the carbon or the wider environmental impact of the industry by 50%, and also seeking to encourage exports. We think we're doing some really exciting cutting edge work in the UK on digital technologies, offsite manufacturing, and there's the potential for us to export these globally. And we have done quite well recently. For example, we recently reached an agreement with the government of Peru on a £100 million government-to-government contract, which we hope will just be the start of a number of agreements struck between the UK government or firms within the industry and foreign governments to deliver projects overseas better, faster, and more efficiently. So I'll end there, but I'm very happy to respond to any questions that
No,
has.
thank you, Fergus. That's a fantastic overview of where you are, and I think it's not a, as you say, not an easy place to be, and really appreciate your insights there. As I said, we do have a dedicated Q&A, so I know, like me, you've got lots and lots of questions for Fergus, I'm sure. We have got a panel session once we've received Andy's slides, and once we've done that, we'll go to the Q&A again. Feel free to start posting any questions, any thoughts, so you don't lose that thought as we go through. So over to you, Andy.
Thanks very much, Jay. Afternoon, everyone, and yeah, thanks to Jay and thanks for Fergus for a great overview of what's going on in the wider construction sector at the moment. I'm going to run through some of the details on the recently announced job support scheme, some details on the job retention bonus as well coming up, and some of the notifications coming out from the CLC on site operating practices, isolation, face coverings, things like that. So I'll start with the job support scheme, and I am going to start by caveating everything that I'm about to say in the context of the JIB agreement. So as many of you will know, and as we've talked about previously on here, because of the way the collective agreement operates, it requires the temporary arrangements that were put in place by ECA and Unite. Currently, because this is at a very early stage and we have not had any detailed guidance or practice direction on how the job support scheme will operate, that discussion will be something that comes up in the future. So at the moment, I will go through the details that we have, but there are quite a few questions that are unanswered, and we'll be doing further updates for member companies, for employees of our members and wider industry on how that will affect JIB members as soon as we get that information. So yeah, basic overview of the job support scheme. So this is the new scheme that will come into place from 1st of November, replacing the job retention scheme that closes on the 31st of October. Job support scheme will run for 6 months, and the purpose of the scheme is for government to subsidise part of wages that an individual cannot work because they've reduced hours because of lower demand. So one of the core elements here, and on what differs the job support scheme from, say, the job retention scheme, is that workers must work a third of their normal hours, and then the government and the employer will each pay a third of the hours not worked. So I'll come on to this slide, and this was released by the Treasury as the Chancellor was going through the details of the job support scheme, but it does quite nicely set out in terms of the infographic about the split of costs and pay. So if we have a situation where an individual is working a third of their normal hours, then the employer will contribute a third of the hours not worked. So that's an additional 22%, and the government will pay a third of the hours not worked, so 22%. So overall, that would be 77% of the normal pay for an individual, but they would only be working 33%, a third of their normal hours. So looking at the general eligibility for the scheme first, very similar to what we saw with the job retention scheme. So the employer must have a UK bank account, must have RTI submissions in for those PAYE employees. The deadline for RTI submissions is the 23rd of September for the job support scheme, so for that eligibility. And again, that's so that individuals are not employed after the announcement simply to take use of the scheme. The government refer to viable jobs. in their guidance, in their support, and certainly the view that these jobs should exist anyway, more than, say, propping up jobs which, in their words, are not viable. So all SMEs will be eligible, and large businesses will be eligible if turnover has fallen during the pandemic. Now, we don't know what the definition of an SME is, or a large business is in this context yet. That wasn't in the guidance or the fact sheet that's released. Assumption in line with other legislation, other schemes around the employment settings, it's probably going to be 250 employees will be the threshold for a large business, but we don't know the details yet. That's simply my view of what is likely. One element that was mentioned in the fact sheet was that large businesses would not be expected to be paying dividends or to operate share buyback schemes while accessing the government support through the job support scheme. Again, it talks about it being it's an expectation. So what that means in terms of the final guidance, we're not quite sure, but it sounds as though it won't be prevented, but maybe discouraged or only permitted in certain circumstances. So this scheme will be open to any employer, regardless, or as long as they meet the criteria, regardless of whether they use the job retention scheme or not. And likewise, individuals do not need to have been furloughed to access the job support scheme, but they will need to be working a third of their normal hours, as we said. The guidance also suggests that that's likely to change in the future. So it's likely that that will increase and that the minimum number of hours required will increase as we go forward. Because this will involve a variation of contract, albeit temporarily, there will need to be an agreement between the employer and the employee and notified in writing. And again, the guidance in the fact sheet does say that that may be required as evidence to see that claims are being processed properly as well. So something that would need to be retained by the company. So in terms of the grant, and this is obviously the area which has driven the most discussion so far. So in a situation, you've got an individual working a minimum of a third of their normal hours. For JIB member companies, that'd be 12.5 hours, and the employer will pay the individual for the time worked as normal. The employer and the government will then each pay 1/3 of the hours not worked. So you've got 66% potentially of hours not worked. Government will pay a third of that, 22%. Employer pays a third of that, 22%, and then 22% of that is lost. The grant will be capped by government at $697.92 per month, but that will only affect people that are on a higher wage. It's going to be over about £38,000 per annum. And this scheme will see a minimum of 77-78% of normal pay for employees. What we know so far is that the government will not cover national insurance contributions or pensions, which they did under the job retention scheme. That will be payable by the employer. We did have a question a little while ago about whether that would be national insurance and pension contributions on the reduced wage, so that 78%, or on normal wages. It's likely to be on the reduced wage, but again, that hasn't been confirmed. But that would seem logical. That would be expected. Normal wages, normal hours, is based on the same calculation as we saw under the job retention scheme. For JIB companies, that would be probably contracted as 37.5, but for many people, they will also do overtime. That might be something that's regular. Again, it'll be same calculation, looking at the 12 months in the previous tax year, for example. This system is specified. It will be paid in arrears. So portal through gov.uk will be opened up in December, and that will allow for the November run. So it's not something that will be paid in advance or given to companies and employees on the assumption that they will do particular actions. So there will be a requirement for companies to fund the required amounts upfront and then claim in arrears. So from a cash flow perspective, that might produce some difficulties for companies depending on their circumstances. Interestingly, under the fact sheet, it has stated that it is, again, expected that employers will not be able to top up wages. So with the job retention scheme, we saw, and indeed quite a few companies were able to top up wages to 100%. This suggests that that will not be possible for companies to do, and also to claim the grant. But again, so waiting to see full guidance on this. My view is that it's likely to come down to the view of government and lower demand and companies being in financial difficulty, therefore needing that support, rather than companies say that would not necessarily need this support and accessing it anyway. But we'll have to see what the guidance says in the long run. So at the bottom there is a table that's from the government fact sheet on the job support scheme. That fact sheet is linked from the Coronavirus Hub on the JIB website. So I would suggest that everybody goes on to Coronavirus Hub, look at the updates, and take a look through the fact sheet if this is going to be a scheme that would be of benefit. And this sets out the breakdown for a few different scenarios for people. First column, working a third of their normal hours, and then up to, say, 70% of their normal hours. So it just shows you what the individual would receive as part of their earnings, what the government contribution would be in each case, and what the employer contribution would be in each case. So the job retention bonus, so it's one that was announced a little while ago now, and will be coming into effect for those that are employed on the 31st of January 2021. So the bonus is available to employers for each employee who has been furloughed at some point, remains employed. They cannot be under notice, cannot be under notice of redundancy or termination at the 31st of January 2021, and the payment for each of those employees will be £1,000 to the employer. It is a bonus for the employer, so it means that it does not necessarily need to be passed on to the employee. The employer must have paid the employee a minimum of £1,560 between the 6th of November and the 5th of February 2021. So again, that's just to prevent people from being put on, say, 0 hours contracts, not working during that period, and employers seeking the bonus. There will be a portal open to submit claims. That will open on the 15th of February. It will only be open for 6 weeks. So companies that are eligible and looking to claim that bonus, for anyone that's been furloughed, will have up until the 31st of March 2021 to make that submission. And finally, I'll come to a few of the other changes of note. So firstly, there was new legislation introduced under the Health Protection Regulations 2020. There, as you see, that introduces mandatory periods for self-isolation and some of the financial penalties which can apply for those that do not follow correct self-isolation procedures. And that's both for individuals if they have tested positive for COVID, and for any person in their household, and for those that are contacted by NHS track and trace and required to self-isolate because they've come in contact with somebody who has tested positive. So there are some fines now that can apply to both the individual and also employers. So an employer cannot knowingly allow people who should be self-isolating to attend place of work. A fine starter to £1,000 for employers that do allow individuals onto their sites. Again, full details and link to the legislation is on the Coronavirus Hub. So again, have a look at that detail. Last one was face coverings. So CLC updated their statement on the use of face coverings in construction during coronavirus. And this is also following updates in legislation for public settings. So what we're now seeing as a requirement in restaurants, in pubs, in other premises. So the CLC are recommending that face coverings are worn where RPE, where respiratory protective equipment is not a requirement, if the workplace is enclosed and where social distancing is not always possible, and where workers come into contact with people that they do not normally meet. It is all three of those requirements, in which case recommendation is that face coverings are worn at work. And with canteens, face coverings will be required apart from when individuals are seated for the purposes of eating and drinking. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. As always, that is a good summary of quite another complex area. I share your hesitance in not being able to commit yourself, because I think, like you, others have thought we understood the government scheme to be working one way, then to find out a week later that things have changed again. So I think it's good to add an element of caution till we see some of the details. Okay, now this is where we can get our delegates more engaged. Some of you may not be able to get through to the Q&A, so I have got some questions prepared. But Fergus, I think some of the questions are a little around transparency, just how government process operates, and there seems to be a theme coming out really. The first one's on the site operating procedures. People are just asking questions, well, how is the process established? How do you determine what's the right thing for the environment? Just a little bit, if you could say a few words on how that SOP has been drawn up and how people are involved.
Sure. The way in which it works is that it's actually been drafted by Build UK with input from a wide range of different organisations. And the starting point for this has been the government guidance for construction sites has been published on the website, and we've updated it in response to changes to that. What typically happens is that Build UK will basically produce the first draft, and we will then consult a number of other organisations through the task force. But we also, as a matter of course, consult the Health and Safety Executive to check that they are content and that their interpretation of the guidance is the same as ours. And in the past, we've also, when there have been some more material changes, consulted Public Health England, who are the people who actually draft a lot of the guidance for government. Once we've done that, we finalise it and then we publish it as our advice on how to interpret the government guidance that you should be applying to sites. Now, we know that some firms use this and follow our procedures absolutely. Some firms, particularly some of the larger contractors, tend to want to do their own thing, and it fits in better with the way in which they operate their own sites. But it's intended to be a service and form of advice for industry.
Sure, no, that's helpful. Once you've got the floor, just on that sort of similar theme, a killer fact for you, Fergus, 40% of construction value is outside the scope of CITB. In fact, it comes from the engineering service. What we mean by that is the electrical, plumbing, and the mechanical. And around 50% of all construction-related apprentices as well. So it's quite a big sector that's outside the scope of CITB. People are asking the question of what process do you have for CLC in engaging in that parts of the construction and built environment that's not necessarily covered by CITB?
Well, I mean, bear in mind that the CITB's role is obviously limited by its charter. we work with it because it does cover that 42% of the construction industry. But absolutely, I accept the point that there are bits that fall outside. We work with a whole range of different organisations, trade associations, other representative bodies, professional institutions, are parts of the sector not covered by the CITB. And they are part of a CLC skills work stream as well, which again, I mean, it includes a wider range of industry representatives. And actually, they spend much time debating things like the operation of the apprenticeship levy, and they've been looking at other forms of government support for employment and training within the industry that's not CITB related as well. It's just they are an important stakeholder for a large proportion of the industry.
Yeah, no, that's very important that you're showing that there's a much broader inward-looking and input into government thinking. That's encouraging and good to know. I guess one for both Andy and Fergus. I think we're quite mindful. When I joined the sector 12 months ago, one of the things I heard quite loud and clear was about skill shortage. And we're trying to upskill and bring in new talent into the sector and apprentices. In the last recession, I think there was thousands of apprentices that were made redundant. We've got currently, I think the latest stats, Andy, is about 40% of all electrical apprentices are still understood to be on furlough. That's about 10,000.
Yeah.
There's a real worry around, making sure that future talent is not lost. Initially, perhaps your thoughts, Fergus. What additional government support to employers can you be sort of thinking? And I'm thinking beyond. I think the questions are beyond the job retention bonus that Andy touched on and the job support scheme. Is there anything else in the pipeline that government are thinking about?
Well, one of the things that we have identified that we could look to do is finding creative ways of using the funding that firms already have paid via the apprenticeship levy, either within the firm or the benefit of the whole industry. And one of the main requests that the CLC has made of the Treasury as part of the spending review process is for more support for apprentices and skills development. And it's also something the Department for Education, who we work very closely with, has also been looking at, because we are really very aware that apprentices as a group are particularly vulnerable at this point in time, because firms want to see them as more of a cost than a benefit, unfortunately. And I appreciate that's a short-sighted view, but we have to understand that there is a degree of crisis within the industry now. So we are looking at that actively, and I would hope that in the next 2 or 3 months we would be able to offer more support of some sort, or direct financial support, one sort or another, for firms to continue to recruit and employ apprentices.
Yeah, no, I think, as you say, it's a crisis, so urgent support is certainly going to be welcome. Andy, any thoughts from your point of view?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that's just worth reminding people of, I suppose, that the ECA run a labour loan scheme. Firstly, that's been, say, rejuvenated this year, given the requirements for firms to share labour where there has been, say, a particular demand in one area and lower demand in another, and I know that's been quite successful. They're also utilising that support scheme for apprenticeships. So I would suggest to any companies that perhaps have not been able to get apprentices back on site at the moment to speak to their ECA regional manager and the team there to see if that support can be utilised to get apprentices back on site, back working. The ECA also produced a document quite recently on the health and safety implications of bringing apprentices back onto site at the moment in COVID secure workplaces, how that supervision should be handled, and indeed, and it can be. And perhaps there's been a little bit of hesitancy, or apprentices have been at the back of the queue to bring them back onto site for various reasons. Supervision, probably one of the main aspects there. So again, there's some good resources on the ECA website. I would advise companies to have a look at that and how they can bring back apprentices.
No, thanks, Andy. Thanks, Fergus. mindful of time, so we've got quite a few questions coming through, Fergus. You made reference about the pipeline of the projects being approved and work available. How can people find out more about that?
The details of those are published on the .gov website. I'm not sure what the link is, but if you Google it, you should be able to find the National Infrastructure and Construction Pipeline or Accelerated Pipeline, something like that.
What we'll do, Fergus, is we'll perhaps get that link from you offline, and we'll publish it with the recording to make sure everyone's got a little bit around that. There's one of the things that the JIB is quite proud of, Fergus, is around direct employment. And both the CLC Future Skills Report and the Industry Recovery Plan recognise that as a real central significance of direct employment, and particularly for JIB members that are directly employed. They're the ones that are more likely to take on apprentices, greater competency, and the ones that are going to be pushing more on innovation. BEIS, I think what people are asking is where does BEIS sit on this? Because back in 2018, you were talking about implementing some update on employment status reforms following the Taylor Good Work report. Is there anything in the pipeline that you're able to perhaps share with colleagues today?
Well, we did recently, I think this was really within the last couple of weeks, published the Social Value Framework, which is going to guide government procurement going forwards, which emphasised the importance of ensuring that procurements of infrastructure and construction do deliver wider social value, whether it's economic, in the sense of stimulating local economies and giving people opportunity, supporting skills development and responsible behaviour by firms, or delivering wider environmental benefits. And this is something that we intend to embed in government procurement going forwards via the construction playbook. So there was a published public procurement notice. And again, I'm probably going to send you a whole load of links after this meeting, but I'll make sure you...
Well, I think that's encouraging, and I think that's something we'll talk a little bit offline about some of the work we're doing around direct employment. So, some technical questions, Andy. I'm sure you can fire these off quite quickly. Does the employer calculate NIC and pension on the salary under the job support scheme or normal wages? I think you might have referenced that already, but
Indeed, at the moment, until we get the full guidance, we don't know a definitive answer. I'm going to assume it's on the wage under the job support scheme, though.
I think you referenced that, yeah. And can employees take holiday whilst on the JSS?
Yeah, this one's come up a couple of times. There is absolutely no mention so far of holiday within the guidance and the fact sheet. And indeed, I know a couple of people have asked that will holiday constitute working hours for the purposes of the job support scheme? So could somebody have a couple of days holiday, use that as working hours, and then access the job support scheme? We don't know is the short answer. I'm going to assume that holiday will not be considered part of working hours for the purposes of the scheme, but I stand to be corrected. And I think I was a couple of times on the job retention scheme as the various updates were released. So as soon as we know, we'll relay that to members.
Yeah, no, and again, I know we're referring to lots of other websites, and there is a question being around, can we share some of the links to the platform on the sharing labour that's been mentioned as well? So both the ECA that you talked about, and also on the talent retention scheme. I think one of the questions people ask in Fergus is why is that any different to other job sites, I guess, and why should businesses look to use a TRS rather than other platforms that might exist, recruitment platforms might exist?
I think the reason for using the TRS is simply because of the scale and the level of interest that we've had from the industry. We invested in this as a direct response to a request from a large segment of the industry that wanted to use this rather than trying to work through a patchwork quilt of some of the existing websites and online portals that support recruitment. Now, firms are obviously able to continue to doing that. And there might be a good case for some firms doing that if you're looking for people who are specialists in a particular area and there's one portal that's particularly good for that. But as a general industry-wide, all occupations, all regions, form of or mechanism for supporting employment, the talent retention scheme is the one that we're backing at the moment.
No, I totally understand that. And I'm sure there'll be a range of different views about that. I think you've electrified the delegates today, Fergus, by your sort of reassurance about the pipeline of work that you're pushing through. I think people are, again, what I'm reading through some of the questions, and there seems to be a running theme around, well, you know, you should be thinking about not only companies that employ apprentices, but work under JIB standards of making sure the employees are looked after. That social value clause that you referred to, if it's embedded into the, you should make sure you're rewarding the work so the businesses are doing what I think is what government wants, is implementing the right sort of behaviours of raising standards, employing skilled workforce, paying good rates, recruiting youngsters and apprentices, and the pipeline. So I think that's just sort of I'm not sure you want to respond to that, but that's certainly coming through loud and clear.
Yeah, I mean, that is exactly the approach that we want to adopt. We see this as being intrinsic to the approach that we want to adopt, which is embedding outcome-based procurement and delivering best value as the overriding objective of all construction procurement that we do. So we've got the policy framework in place through the social value framework. We're trying to put tools at the disposal of procurers. So we've invested through the Construction Innovation Hub in the development of a value toolkit that enables procurers to identify what value constitutes in the context of a particular project and make some of the necessary trade-offs. And then we're encouraging them to embed these in procurement specifications. So we shift away from procurement based on lowest cost, or procurement which is not intentionally targeted on lowest cost, but almost becomes that by default because you haven't specified clearly enough what else you're looking for.
Yeah. Well, I think certainly we can have a discussion offline, because that's exactly the sort of messaging we would want to, but also trying to build on that. Some observations. Hinkley Point C is the best example of COVID secure workplace and construction leader. If you want an example, that I think what delegates saying, that's a good one to look at. Sizewell C will offer a fantastic opportunity to transition skills, experience, etc. from HBC, so the skills are not lost. And the question being posed behind that is, does government agree with the commitment that there needs to be a visible with a clear understanding on proposed finance models of what does a regulated asset-based arrangement offer to such infrastructure projects? Bit of a mouthful there. Do you want to take that further?
I mean, it's a project that's under active consideration now. The proposal has been developed. Obviously, though, this is a huge commitment, as Hinkley Point C has been a huge commitment, and the world has changed as a result of coronavirus. So it is something on which, yes, a decision will have to be taken. Unfortunately, I can't give you any idea as to when that will be at this point.
Yeah. Okay. I'm mindful of time, and there's been quite a few questions we haven't been able to get through. So don't worry, delegates. We'll make sure that we'll capture the questions that have been answered and get some answers sent out, together with a copy of the podcast if you want to listen back to any, or share it with colleagues. So we'll make sure that's available as well. I wanted to sort of close really by thanking both our again esteemed presenters, both Andy and Fergus, taking time out, I think, from your busy schedules to be with us, and that's been invaluable. One thing I wanted to sort of thank our delegates. I mean, your participation has been invaluable. Sorry we couldn't get around to all the questions, but I've certainly enjoyed some of the discussions. But I think we can see the sort of trajectory we need to be pushing government on. And I think we're on the right path. But again, we've got to double our efforts. One thing to keep out, again, just giving you early heads up, we have commissioned a new report on direct employment, which has been part of the theme of today's discussions, about strengthening our call for using JIB members who offer skilled, healthier workforce that are more productive, and as I say, that those ones that recruit and retain apprentices. So do watch out for that. We'll be shortly trailing a little bit more of that work. I think you've posed some great questions. Hopefully you've got the answers you wanted to hear. If not, let us know. We'll make sure we press both the delegates or a bit more clear explanation of any of the points that they've covered. But a copy of the presentation will be sent out that we received, together with all the links that you've asked for. So we'll make sure we get that back. Again, we'll be sending out short feedback together with this webinar. And I think it's really important that we hear back from you, both good and bad. It's really important that we get the content, the relevant issues that are forefront of your mind in front of you. So if something was missing or something you want to hear more of or less of, then do let us know. But I want to thank everyone for joining us and wish you a safe and productive day.
Thank you.